We have extreme poverty in the world, inequalities, environmental crises, climate change, destruction of biodiversity, extinction of species, derangement of ecosystems, massive pollution. There are a lot of greedy people in the world. There are a lot of people who want to be rich. And so if the problem can be posed as a problem of financial incentive, you mobilize a lot of energy in the human sense. But this problem transcends simply the profit motive. In some ways, it can work against the profit motive. It's crazy to some people, the idea that you have to leave your oil or gas under the ground. That's our wealth. What do you mean leave it under the ground? That seems absolutely nuts to many of our politicians who are not well trained, not very smart, don't understand what this issue is, but they happen to be our politicians.
So Julian's going to pose the questions. So Julian.
Okay, Professor Sachs. So question one, it's more than a warm-up. It's one of our fundamental questions. Just want to pose to you, why does economics matter? What role does it play in our society in the West? And does mainstream economics, the way it's typically taught, does it help provide credible solutions to the world's most salient problems, ecological decline, inequality, war, and so on?
Economics, of course, is about our material lives. We're physical creatures. We need food, we need sustenance, we need shelter, we need safe water. And of course, we want more than that. We want access to education. We want access to healthcare. We want to have meaningful lives where we can develop skills, contribute to society, provide for families and friends. And economics is the field of study of material conditions, technology, know-how, and how to deploy our know-how for well-being. So it's a good field. It's a challenging field because to be useful, it is not a field like maybe astronomy or cosmology that's mainly observational. It's a field that's trying to find practical solutions to practical problems. And when we ask whether economics as currently practiced does that, I would say in certain areas, yes. There's a lot more knowledge today than 100 years ago about how to avoid certain kinds of society or economy-wide crises. John Maynard Keynes made a big contribution to that, and so has modern macroeconomics. On the other hand, it's clear that economics is failing to lead to solutions in other areas. We have extreme poverty in the world, still in the midst of wealth. We have inequalities that I think are rightly seen as extreme and destabilizing. We have environmental crises that have been noted for decades but are not being solved. And I wouldn't pin all of the blame on economics for sure, but I would say that the economics that we practice right now is not well designed in many ways for the kinds of problem solving that we need. And one of the features of economics in the West, and because of the power of the West worldwide for 2 centuries, was a kind of complacency at a minimum that somehow markets would, in a self-organized way, find solutions to complex problems. And this is certainly not the case. So we need an economics that's problem-solving based, that is can achieve goals, that operates and considers the global scale interconnections that operates well across time, because the time dimension of our challenges is extremely pertinent and salient these days, and that has a much clearer ethical basis, so practitioners have a better idea of what needs to be solved and why. So in this sense, I would give mixed grades to economics as it is currently practiced in the world.
And so the second question is, given the, in some cases, immense influence that economists in modern day economic society have, should some economists in certain positions be held accountable for their advice, just as doctors, lawyers, and financial advisors are? And would that even be possible?
Well, of course, we should all be held accountable for what we do at the scale of moral responsibility. And I think we have obligations in our professional life to do the best possible. I think the Hippocratic oath of that doctors take is a good spur for economics as well, that any practitioner of a profession like economics has the same kind of ethical responsibilities as a doctor should have in his or her practice. Of course, doctors take Hippocratic oaths and then do terrible things. Economists can make contributions or do advertently or inadvertently terrible things. But I think we all in our lives have ethical responsibilities that we should try to understand as clearly as possible.
Great, thank you. We have a question from a friend and colleague who couldn't be here today, named Alan Kerman. He wrote an article in the early 90s, Who Does the Representative Agent Represent? He's been a big critic of, you could say, orthodoxy in his life. And he asked us to ask you, would you agree that microeconomics has made remarkably little progress in understanding either how the economic system actually works or in making predictions? Most people who use it seem to use it as a fig leaf to cover up ideological convictions.
Well, it's a big question. Microeconomics is a lot of things. It works best when it's describing specifically phenomena about market transactions, the organization and outcomes of auctions, and some kinds of strategic interactions. Microeconomics is not very helpful often when the challenges are complex, transcend what markets can or possibly should solve, problems of the commons, problems of the environment, and microeconomics, as has been traditionally taught, with the assumptions of economic man as having stable utility functions and rather simplistic kinds of behaviors, is not very helpful when the issues of behavior itself, such as trust or collective action, are at the center of concern. So microeconomics is not very good when you come to political or community questions, because the underlying assumptions of economics, as at least I was taught, that's a long time ago, but I think still relatively accurately the way it's taught today, simply lacks tools for understanding human behaviors adequately in many contexts, understanding politics, understanding social dynamics, And so these are areas where microeconomics generally fails. More generally, I think economics works best when it's trying to address real problems, and to do so using a range of tools and a varying perspectives. I like medicine as a clinical profession because doctors are trained to know fundamental areas of science and physiology and pathology, but they're also, if they're good, trained to understand particular patients and particular circumstances. And that kind of clinical economics, clinical medicine, I've said, has a lot of analogies to what good economics would be, but that's not the way that economics is conveyed or practiced very often. So again, I have to say, mixed grades. Nothing is all or nothing. There are a lot of intelligent and well-meaning people who are trained and certified as economists, and they can be helpful in certain contexts. But obviously, in my opinion, we're not making headway on some of the very big and increasingly urgent challenges in the world.
Okay. Great. I'll just go into my next question because it seems to follow nicely on capitalism. We live, for lack of a better term, we live in a capitalist civilization, a global capitalist system with different types of capitalisms. And the question is this: does the economics discipline, as it's taught, I know the Anglo-American world the best, if I can put it that way. And so is economics in the West and in this part of the West, does it provide people with a clear understanding of how capitalism works?
In general, economics as it's taught, and by that I mean in PhD programs in universities in the United States or in Europe, and in, of course, parts of the developing world also, though I don't want to speak for every place, but economics as it's taught in the United States is very deficient in helping inductees into the profession understand the institutional richness and differences and history and contexts of different places around the world. In fact, in general, economics training is deficient in empirical content, historical content, geographical knowledge and content. It's quite conceptual, theoretical, and uniform. So if one is a naive student in a modern PhD program, generally the view that is conveyed is economies are the same everywhere, people are the same everywhere, organization is the same everywhere, and this is false, and it's naive, and it's also dangerous in many ways. It leads, of course, to wrong approaches to diagnostics. It leads to wrong uniformity of solutions. It doesn't train people for diversity, which is the hallmark of an interconnected world. And again, I can't speak for every program. And I'm only guessing, but I know from my own experience and my sense of economics training at the two schools where I've taught, Harvard and Columbia University, the knowledge of history and context is very, very little in a PhD program. If you get it at all, you get it on your own well after your training.
Okay. Great. I'm just going to make a seeming diversion into political economy and ecology and global environment. So the question, Professor Sachs, is this: in view of the large and visible, palpable, intensifying effects of climate change and wider ecological decline, why isn't more progress being made? And I'm sticking to the West here, but why isn't more progress being made in the West? And I'll just finish that question by adding, presumably, it's in the interests of every part of our society. And it's in the interest of every group within our society, whether it's just regular working people or everyone else. We're all people from top to bottom of this pyramid. Presumably, it's in everyone's interest. And it's just fascinating why and worrying why there hasn't been more progress.
We have a crisis that is very advanced and very dangerous of the human impacts on the physical environment, not only climate change, but destruction of biodiversity, extinction of species, derangement of ecosystems, massive pollution. And we've known generally about such issues at least for 50 years, since 1970 or so. The first global conference on this issue was 1972 in Stockholm. 32 years ago at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, many treaties were adopted, for example, to address the climate crisis in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and to address the loss of biodiversity in the Convention on Biological Diversity, and to address the derangement of ecosystem functions in the UN Convention to combat desertification. So 32 years ago, not only were these ills recognized, but treaties were adopted that are almost entirely inclusive of all countries in the world to address these crises. And yet 32 years onward, there's really no progress. In all of these circumstances, the situation is far worse than it was in 1992. So it poses a question. What's going on? It's not complete ignorance, because by the time you reach a treaty, there's actually a quite high level of knowledge, at least among specialized units within a government, and the capacity of those specialized units to convince a parliament or head of state or both to commit national efforts to address these crises. And that's been more than 3 decades. It poses a lot of questions of why, and there's no single answer to this, except to say at a very general level, global scale problem solving is not the norm of human existence. Even national scale problem solving is not the norm of existence, though we're more familiar with nations trying to take on problems. Often they do so in a terrible way by making wars or doing other destructive things, but at least at a national level, the idea of mobilizing the nation to do something is something that's been with us for hundreds of years. The idea of mobilizing the world to do something, for most people, is a kind of irrelevance or fairy tale, and it still is, I would say, mocked by a lot of the world. Oh, that's the UN, or that's a talking shop, and so forth. So at the most basic level, global scale problems are tough, and I wish we didn't have them because it would be easier if we didn't have such problems. If we could really leave everything to nations or cities or our households, that would be so much easier. It happens that nature has handed us a global scale problem because carbon dioxide absorbs infrared radiation and therefore is a greenhouse gas that warms the planet. Bad luck of chemistry. And so we have a problem that we are not prepared to have. Our species is 300,000 or so years old, maybe 200,000 years old as modern Homo sapiens. And for the first 199,900 years, we didn't even know about such problems. So this is something very new. That's number one. Number two, solutions are complex. They're not simple to solve the climate crisis. They go to the heart of our economic life. Our energy system is akin in some ways to our circulatory system. And if you're told you need a complete overhaul of your circulatory system, and we're going to keep you going at the same time, that's quite a difficult feat. And so this is a huge challenge. Change the energy system, change the land use patterns around the world, know what to do about it and how to do about it when the potential solutions are changing all the time because of technological change. Fortunately, they're getting better and better, but still, it's complicated to know what to do. So even the capacity to understand this problem at a technical level is not easy. A third problem is that if it were simply a matter of making profits in a different way, that would be helpful, because in types of problems that can be solved by the profit motive, there are a lot of greedy people in the world. There are a lot of people who want to be rich. And so if the problem can be posed as a problem of financial incentive, you mobilize a lot of energy in the human sense. But this problem transcends simply the profit motive. In some ways, it can work against the profit motive. It's crazy to some people, the idea that you have to leave your oil or gas under the ground. That's our wealth. What do you mean leave it under the ground? That seems absolutely nuts to many of our politicians who are not well trained, not very smart, don't understand what this issue is, but they happen to be our politicians. So this is another piece of the puzzle. You need a global scale change. And for many parts of this problem, you need at least regional cooperation. The United States should work with Canada and Mexico at a minimum to have a North American energy system that is decarbonized. But we barely work together. Well, Canada and the US occasionally work together. Mexico is seen by the US only as a problem of migrants. It's not seen as, or maybe as a place to have a low-cost piece of your supply chain, but it's not seen as a partner in problem solving of environmental issues. That's amazing, but that actually is the case. So this is another part of the problem. Corruption of our politics is obvious, and vested interests are obvious. Canada's politics turn around the province of Alberta in a large way. That province, which is fossil fuel rich, brings down governments or creates prime ministers or creates governments. And in the United States, the same is true of Texas and the other major fossil fuel states. So our vested interest politics, and in the United States, I would say a quite high level of corruption of our politics, which is a money game, is another obstacle to this. So I find this issue urgent, poignant, dangerous, and complicated to find real solutions. And I would say economists have made some contributions to this, not so helpful, by the way, but some. They haven't really understood the ecological drama, and they've offered, of course, in the normal economics way, the idea of a market price as on carbon dioxide as the main answer. So they tend to peddle one tool out of a much more complicated toolkit. So it's not very sophisticated analysis, and it hasn't really led to any kind of breakthrough on this issue. In fact, we don't have a worldwide breakthrough. We're still emitting more greenhouse gas per year, which continues to rise year by year since 1992. So we have not even stabilized or reached a peak of emissions, much less bringing the emissions down to zero. So it's a drama, and the world's confused. Many politicians, I can speak for my own country, are ignorant, venal, corrupt, uncaring, without the attention span, without the knowledge base, certainly without the experience even to try to solve the problems. And then if everyone were trying to solve this problem, it would still be very complicated. So this is unfortunately our reality right now, which is 32 years after signing an agreement which said that we would stabilize the greenhouse gas concentrations. They are high, rising, and bringing us to thresholds that are extremely dangerous for the planet.
I would like to have a little follow-up question. I mean, you talked about all these problems with climate change, but I mean, I think there are others as well. And you said these problems are extremely complex, yeah, and we should solve them with cooperation, with intelligent ideas, and so on. No? To me, it seems that the world is going exactly in the opposite direction, yeah, with populists, with sovereignists, with people that are saying, no, we just care about our problems and so on. And with the idea of the politicians that things are simple, no, it doesn't exist, the problem doesn't exist, and so on. So basically suggesting to the voters, to the people, no, don't worry, it will be fine and it will be okay. How to remain optimistic with this in this situation?
Well, this is really a major point, which is that it's absolutely possible to not only envision, but to tell a very vivid story of the world going to hell or the world going to solutions. You cannot sit here and say, it's all over, we're finished. And you certainly can't sit here and say, come on, these are all small problems, everything's fine. We really face enormous challenges that still have an open future to them, where solutions could be found or disaster could follow. And it's not only the disaster of climate change. For me, the disaster of nuclear war is even more urgent and pressing than these other issues, because I think it's absolutely possible. Some might even say likely that we're going to stumble into nuclear war, because many of our leaders are as stupid and short-sighted and ignorant and casual and populistic about nuclear war as they are about climate change or about other issues. So in this sense, the question of our future is, in my opinion, a very, very real one. What I know to be the case from my own analysis and my analysis of the analysis of hundreds and thousands of other people is that there are paths to solutions. So I have not found that challenges like climate change or the food supply or water stress or biodiversity are unsolvable, where one simply says, we have trapped ourselves and there's no way out. I don't believe that that's the right way to think about this. In fact, quite the contrary. I do believe that there are ways, realistic ways, that by 2050 we could basically have put an end to the risk of runaway climate change by making major changes in how our energy and agriculture systems operate. In other words, the means exist. The huge challenge, in my view, is the idea of focusing on those challenges as our most pressing challenges, of mobilizing the collective action to do something about these, of facing the deep issues of technological planning and mobilizing both public and private expertise to do this, winning enough public trust that this is in the interest of the whole society, and putting aside the conflicts that we have, say, between the United States and Russia or the United States and China, to say this is more important. We better do this rather than have a war about whether NATO expands to Ukraine, which I would regard as about a sixth-rate issue and only a provocation and not something to waste our time on, and certainly not something to waste hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian lives on. So this is the question. Can we deploy the solutions that analysis teaches us? And the point you're making is that as crises get worse, governance often gets worse as well. You might think as crises get worse, that brings to the fore those who can provide solutions, because solutions are scarce and therefore they have the highest shadow value. We would say they have the highest value for society, the people who can offer solutions. But of course, in our world and our politics, the charlatans also rise to the surface, because easy solutions sound better than complicated solutions. And the populists have a basic knack for saying, well, it's easy to do this. All we have to do is get rid of the Chinese, get rid of the immigrants, go back to the 8th century, go back to the 8th century BC. There are all sorts of people that have their extreme ideas and simple solutions. So I believe we're in a battle not just of interests, but in a battle of ideas, and that ideas really matter right now. And I find my own job and life about trying to do two things. One, to understand what is the solution, not only what are the problems. The problems are evident, but what's a way out? And then to try to convey that way out with the idea that showing something positive could at least help spur the adoption of that set of solutions. I'm not myself, of course, a politician, but I want to affect politics by saying here is a viable, real path out of our problems right now. It's not what you have on offer by either political party in the United States, but it would work better for you, the voters, than what they're offering, and hoping that some political entrepreneur or party takes up the better approach. I can say, by the way, for all of our politicians right now, they're in the Western world, they're all unpopular. No one believes them. No one supports them, whether it's Biden or Trudeau or Schultz or Macron. No one likes them right now, and for good reason. They're not offering solutions right now. They're pandering. They are trying to out-populist the populists, or they are following an outdated script, or they don't understand the problem, so they should get out of the way. It's a combination of all of those. But the point you are making, or the point I'm making also in response to your question, is we're in I believe, let me put it this way, that ideas are enormously important. And the realistic, sound, thoughtful, prudent, ethical approaches to problem solving need to be out there as options for society in as visible way as possible. And maybe just to say, to go back to the function of economists and economics and so forth, in my own life, I have taken the view that because I am a tenured professor and I have my job stability and have had that since 1983, I regard that privilege as an opportunity to work on practical problem solving. So I have decided 40 years ago that I would spend basically half my time in travel, visits, consultations, policy proposals, meeting after meeting after meeting of government officials and people who pull economic levers, because while that doesn't maximize my journal article production, it does, to my mind, make best use of the knowledge that I've been lucky to be able to acquire.
Professor Sachs, I was going to ask a couple of other questions, but you mentioned the risk, your concern about the risk of nuclear conflict, and I share that in equal measure. I wanted to ask, during the Cold War, there was a red phone. They were talking, apparently, from what I've read, and it's strange that post-Cold War, but maybe it never ended. There doesn't seem to be dialogue right now between the people running the West and the people running countries like Russia and China. And it's just curious to hear why you might think that is. Why is there no dialogue right now?
I studied very closely the Cuban Missile Crisis and the aftermath of that, and wrote a book about that a dozen years ago. And one of the things that saved the world in October 1962 is that Kennedy and Khrushchev had established a back channel. It was secret, except for a few people on each side, and both the presidents, or the president of the US and the chairman of the Soviet Union, had committed that they wouldn't use that publicly to embarrass or press the other side, but use it as a true back channel. Of course, we don't know whether such a back channel exists right now between Biden and Putin, for example. But my sense is, from fairly close up, but obviously not intimately close up, that it doesn't exist. My sense is that there is no such dialogue or back channel. And my sense also is compounded by the fact that on various occasions, Biden has gone out of his way to publicly insult Putin. He's also insulted President Xi Jinping. I find this behavior deplorable and reprehensible and absolutely dangerous. Under any circumstances, in general, it's better to be polite and respectful. Yes, I can imagine the questions that would be asked about that, but I'm going to ignore that for a moment. But I would say, when your counterpart has 6,000 nuclear weapons in the arsenal, it is better not to make insults, not to make jibes, not to make a statement like Biden made, "For God's sake, that man cannot stay in power." Such statements are absolutely unacceptable in our world. You can hear, I don't think that much of our president, and I haven't thought much of our previous 5 presidents, by the way, so it's not anything partisan. It is part of how our political system produces and reproduces mediocrity, or worse. But we should have basic standards of behavior. And I've said, partly as a jibe, but with a serious intent, that President Biden can use my Zoom account anytime he wants to contact his counterpart. It's just a complete shame and mistake that they aren't on Zoom every day. 5-minute Zoom. Vladimir, Joe, all right, what's happening? Why not? It would make the world a bit safer. And one of the things you learn in life in general, and I've learned in my international professional life, is that there are different perspectives from people in different places, and you better listen to them seriously. And this idea, which is prevalent in the US punditry and the US political class, oh, we know what they want, or they're just evil, or Putin doesn't want to negotiate, or you can't trust them. This kind of generalization is third-rate intellectually. It's completely ignorant. And from a problem-solving point of view, it's about sixth-rate. In other words, it completely precludes solutions. I happen to have the positive life experience of having worked extensively with the Russians, with Ukrainians, with Chinese, with Japanese, with Koreans, with leaders in more than 100 countries around the world. I haven't met a leader that I would say you don't deal with. You have to deal with all of them. And everyone that I've met can be part of a constructive solution, actually. People want respect. Countries want security. They don't want to be bullied. They don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to be humiliated. That's normal human reaction. And first rule of life, do not humiliate a nuclear-powered or nuclear-armed adversary. That's a first principle, I would say. Second, talk to them because they have a point of view. Third, stop dividing the world between good and evil in a simplistic way. I often call it Jesus's foreign policy advice when Jesus said, why do you point to the mote in the other's eye when you have the beam in your own eye? And of course, what he was saying is, why are you attacking the other? Reform yourself. That's actually a very good principle for us staying alive as well. The US should spend less time pointing its finger at China and Russia and saying how terrible these places are, and spend a lot more time saying, how do we make ourselves better and therefore help to inspire others to do the same? That's a very different approach, but I think it's a vastly more effective approach. The first way, yeah, you can finger point, you can score points. Pundits will repeat everything you said. The mainstream media is pretty useless these days because it seems to be in the employ of government. So you can get a good press story, but all you do is draw the world closer to nuclear war through these insults and these jibes and these claims about evil on the other side. You don't come close to solving problems. And we're not going to scare Russia into submission. We're going to induce Russia into agreement. That's a completely different thing. And we're not going to defeat Russia on the battlefield. Anyone who thinks so is, frankly, putting my life and my children's lives and my grandchildren's lives at risk. And that's where I start resenting it, which is I don't want people threatening the lives and well-being of my children and grandchildren. And so all of the casualness about war, frankly, is where I start to get pretty annoyed.
I would like also to have a follow-up question, a little one, again, concerning the public opinion. 2 years ago, the war exploded in Ukraine, yeah, and basically here in Germany, we have a very heavy history with wars and so on. No? in Germany, it was not really a long time that people accepted this war, yeah, said it was okay, it was right, no? And I think people against the war itself were absolutely minority, yeah? My question is, where is the peace movement?
Well, let me tell you, first of all, the war in Ukraine as a hot war broke out in February 2014, not February 2022. So even the most basic facts are mistaken. The war started with the violent overthrow of a government in Ukraine. It is a violent overthrow that I regard as a US-backed coup. Others have different interpretations. Some people call it the revolution of dignity. I call it a US-backed coup. I happen to have some knowledge of events that lead me to call it a US-backed coup. But that's when the war broke out, actually. People, if they knew that better, might be able to understand better the context, because part of the game of the propagandists in the US has been to say the war broke out in an unprovoked way on February 24th, 2022, when Vladimir Putin, unprovoked, launched a war of aggression against Ukraine. Well, that's a game to create a fictional past in order to justify a particular present. That's what Orwell told us. He who controls the past controls the present. He who controls the present controls the future. So the past has been the object of complete misrepresentation. Now, I've tried to say this in Germany, and it's been extremely difficult over the last few years because it's regarded as false, unpatriotic, Putin-loving, Putin apologist, Putin troll, every epithet, rather than listening and discussing. I had an interesting interchange with someone from Sweden who said, I'd like to I'd like to interview you, Professor Sachs. And I said I would be delighted. And then, I'm sorry to say it, and publicly, they wrote back a couple of days ago, it's too dangerous for me to interview you. This is Sweden. Sweden. My God, the country that I grew up on, the Olof Palme country of neutrality, peace, anti-war, and they couldn't mobilize a video talk about peacemaking because it runs against the NATO narrative. So this is where the observation that bad can go to worse comes from. We absolutely need dialogue. We need understanding. We need to hear the perspective of others. I speak very frequently with Russians, Russian leaders, and that doesn't make me a Putin apologist or a Putin troll. It makes me do what I've been doing for more than 30 years. It makes me a professional because I study the issues, I understand the issues. I was an advisor to Mikhail Gorbachev's economic team. I was an advisor to President Yeltsin. I was an advisor to President Kuchma of Ukraine. And I work to try to understand the issues every day. If I don't understand the issues all properly, I want to know through dialogue, not by being shut down, but by discussion, because I know a lot that perhaps others don't know. And so this is really the unusual point now. I know in the German context that when I said that I thought the US had provoked this war, or that NATO enlargement had provoked this war, people told me, well, we can't associate with you anymore, professionally. This is really unusual for what we like to think of as free societies. And yet we are in danger of having crisis spill into disaster. And this is, for me, a very real point. So again, I want to talk about peace because I think that not only is it achievable and is it right, but it can help inspire people to see there's a different way from the way of increased arms, tourist missiles, hitting farther into Russia, defeating Russia at all costs. All of this talk, which could get us all killed and makes no sense.
Like, just a quick, I know we have to go, Professor Sachs. I just had a quick question, and you said people that didn't want to associate with you after you said that in Germany. Has that been, I just wanted to ask you, and you'll obviously tell me if it's too personal, has that been a generalized problem, losing colleagues and even friends because of the stance you've taken using facts and connecting the dots?
Well, for me, at a personal and professional level, I have a joy of contacts all over the world. So a typical day, I'm having discussions perhaps on every continent except for Antarctica, and constant exchanges by email and Zoom and every other way. And I get my share of kudos and thanks and so forth. So I don't feel neglected in any way, and I don't feel bereft of like-minded people in any way. But having said that, there is an officialdom in the U.S. that is real. The U.S. government is a big business. The military-industrial complex is $1 trillion a year business. And it has its influence in my university, in the East Coast, in the think tanks, in the foundations. And there is a security state in the US. And there is a CIA, I have to tell you. That is not a story for James Bond. That's very real and very powerful. There is a system of intelligence agencies, BND, CIA, MI6, that is extremely powerful and, in my view, rather dangerous, actually, because it's unaccountable largely. So I have lost, in certain ways, access to the mainstream media, for example, over recent years. It's not only Ukraine. I'm a very, very fervent critic of Israel, which I believe is committing a genocide in Gaza right now. So some people don't want to hear that. No. And so there is a part of our world, it's mainly the officially connected part, that I find is, for me, cut off in a way that was not the case for much of my professional life. I'm an older guy now, that's okay. But it is also a sign for me of how things work. There's an old expression, I think it's Upton Sinclair, that you can't convince a person of something when his job depends on believing the opposite, or when his income depends on believing the opposite. There are a lot of people, directly or indirectly, in the employ of the US security state. They may not even quite know it, but if they work in the New York Times or the Washington Post, or if they work at Columbia University in certain centers, or if they work in East Coast think tanks, or if they get grants from the mainstream foundations, their livelihood may depend on what they say and how they say it. Mine does not, but that's probably part of my own sense of why I say the things I do. For me, by the way, naive or not naive, I'm just trying to be accurate as possible. That, for me, is the standard that I always intuitively held. Not that I'm always right, but that I try to be. And the more I learned to love and learned ancient Greek philosophy, it is the Socrates, Plato, Aristotle standard, as far as I'm concerned, which is to try to find the truth. I'm blessed. I should thank my university. They, so far, pay my salary and have honored my tenure. And I say what I say out of my conviction of the truth, and believe that the truth is in service of our solution of these problems. But there is a very active security state as well, and it pervades Germany and the US and NATO, and I'm not a great fan right now.
Thanks so much, Professor. That was really illuminating, and we really appreciate your time. So
well,
thanks so much.
Thanks to all of you. Great fun and a great honor to be part of this. So I'm very grateful.